Welcome back to the deep dive. We often tackle topics that seem pretty complicated at first glance, but today's deep dive might take the cake. We're diving into the wild world of taxes, specifically gifting a house.
Yeah, it sounds simple enough, right? You love someone, you give them a house. But it's not always sunshine and roses when the tax man comes knocking.
That's right, because we're not just talking about handing over keys. We're talking about potentially huge financial implications. So to help us unpack all of this, we're looking at a really interesting article from Skloff Financial Group.
Definitely. And they hit on a really important point right off the bat, the annual exclusion for gift taxes. So in 2024, you can actually gift up to $18,000 to anyone without, raising any red flags with the IRS.
Right. And couples can even double that to $36,000,
Yeah.
which I have to say is pretty generous.
It is. It is. And this is but that $18,000 or even $36,000, it doesn't get you very far when you're talking about something as valuable as a house. I mean, think about it. You wouldn't use like a $5 gift card to buy a car.
That's a good way to put it. So when we're dealing with those bigger gifts, that's where the lifetime gift and estate tax exemption come into play. And for 2024, we're talking, what is it, $13.61 million per person?
You got it. Or $27.22 million for couples.
Hmm.
So yeah, you've got some wiggle room there, but every gift above that annual exclusion, it's like taking a bite out of that lifetime limit.
Okay, so there's a much bigger picture here than just what you can give away tax-free each year. Now, the article dives into a really interesting scenario. Let's say you've got a $600,000 house that you bought way back when for $100,000. That $100,000 is your cost basis, essentially, the original price. And you decide to be super generous. You're going to gift this house to, let's say, your child and their spouse.
Right. At first glance, this seems like a win-win for everyone involved. The giver, the receiver, no one owes any taxes right away. You've used some of that annual exclusion, chipped away at the lifetime exemption. Everyone's celebrating, right?
Sounds like a dream come true. Or should I say a tax dream come true?
Oh, but
I have a feeling this is where that dream might turn into a bit of a tax nightmare.
you hit the nail on the head, and this is where understanding this whole cost basis thing is absolutely crucial. Because when you gift an asset like a house, you're not just giving away the property itself, you're also handing over your cost basis.
Okay, so walk us through that. What does that mean exactly for our happy house gifting family?
Sure. Imagine you've got a vintage baseball card, right? You bought it for $10, that's your cost basis. Fast forward a few years, and now it's worth, say, $100. If you sell it, you're going to owe taxes on that $90 profit. We call that capital gains. Now, just apply that same logic to the house.
So in our example, the parents, they bought the house low at $100,000, but they're gifting it when it's worth significantly more, $600,000.
Exactly. And because it's a gift, that $100,000 cost basis, it goes right along with the house to the child and their spouse. They might be over the moon about their new house, but they've also inherited a potential tax headache down the road.
Because if they ever decide to sell that house, they'll be taxed on the difference between the sale price and that much lower cost basis, even though they didn't buy the house themselves.
You're getting it. Let's say, just for example, they decide to sell the house a year later and they get a great offer, $11,100,000. Remember that low cost basis of $100,000?
Right.
Well, now they're facing a massive tax bill on that $1 million gain.
Oh, wow. This suddenly took a turn. This isn't the happy ending everyone was hoping for. Wait, but don't you get a break on capital gains when you sell your primary residence? Wouldn't that help them out at all?
That's the thing, though. They could, but that low cost basis is going to come back to bite them. You see, you can typically exclude up to, I think it's $500,000 in capital gains when you sell your primary residence. But, and this is a big but, you've got to factor in that cost basis first.
So in their case, they can only protect, what, $500,000 of that $1 million gain? That's a lot of money they would owe in taxes.
You're right. It's a hefty chunk of change. Let's say they're in we'll say a 35% marginal tax bracket. Well, that $500,000 in gains, that could mean a tax bill of $175,000. And then on top of that, you've got to think about the net investment income tax, or NIIT for short. That's an extra 3.8% on certain types of investment income. And guess what? Capital gains falls right into that category.
Hold on. NIIT, this is starting to sound a little overwhelming. Can you give us a quick refresher on what exactly that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, it's like an extra layer of taxes for those who are, considered higher earners. Think of it this way. The government wants a bigger piece of the pie when your money is making money. So in this scenario, that remaining $500,000 in gains, they could be looking at another $19,000 in taxes on top of that $175,000 we already talked about.
Wow. Okay. So even with that capital gains exclusion, we're still talking about a pretty substantial tax liability. Would it help at all if they held onto the house a little longer before selling it?
It might take the edge off a little, but unfortunately, it's not going to magically erase that low-cost basis issue. The article goes on to lay out a couple of other scenarios. So let's say they sell the house between 1 and 2 years after receiving it as a gift. In that case, they might catch a break with what are called long-term capital gains rates, which are generally lower than short-term rates, but they're still going to be on the hook for a sizable tax bill.
Okay, so holding onto the house a bit longer could help a little, but it's not a complete solution by any means. What about if they're really patient and wait even longer to sell, like more than 2 years?
Now, that's where things can get really interesting from a strategic standpoint, because if they live in the house as their primary residence for at least 2 of the 5 years before they sell it, they unlock the full power of that $500,000 capital gains exclusion we were talking about earlier.
Oh, so in that case, they could potentially avoid paying any capital gains tax whatsoever. That's a game changer.
Not so fast. We still have to remember that pesky little detail, that low-cost basis of $100,000. Even with the exclusion, they'd still have $500,000 in gains, subject to those long-term capital gains rates. Plus, and you probably saw this coming, the NIIT could still apply.
Ugh, that low-cost basis is like a recurring villain in this story. It just keeps coming back. But, this whole scenario really highlights how what seems like a very generous and heartfelt act, like gifting a home to your children, can have some really significant unintended consequences.
I completely agree. And I think it underscores the importance of thinking beyond just the initial act of giving. We really have to consider those long-term implications carefully. Think of it like a game of chess, right? You can't just focus on your current move. You have to be thinking several steps ahead, anticipating what your opponent might do. In this case, the tax man is your opponent, and he's always thinking a few steps ahead of you.
So are you saying that in these situations, gifting the house might not be the most beneficial move for either party?
It definitely highlights a common blind spot for a lot of people when it comes to their finances, this intersection of different tax laws. You've got these gift tax rules, and they're kind of colliding head on with these capital gains rules. And the end result, well, it can get messy. There's no other way to put it.
The article we were talking about earlier, they actually call this a double tax nightmare.
Okay.
And I'm starting to see why. It's not even just that the kids might face a much larger tax bill somewhere down the line. The original homeowners are also potentially missing out on a big tax advantage that they could have been taking advantage of themselves.
That's exactly right. By choosing to gift the house, they're essentially giving away that $500,000 capital gains exclusion. And that's an exclusion they could have used to reduce their own tax burden if they had decided to sell the property themselves.
It's like, I don't know, winning the lottery and then just handing the ticket to someone else.
Right. It's like leaving money on the table, and that's something you definitely want to avoid.
It's like finding a $100 bill on the sidewalk and just
Yeah.
handing it to a stranger. You could have used that.
Exactly. It makes you think twice, right? And that's why it's so crucial to loop in a financial advisor who really knows their stuff, especially when you're dealing with these big financial decisions. They can look at your individual circumstances, your goals, and help you navigate this whole tax maze without, getting lost along the way.
It's like having a really good map, or even better, a guide, when you're exploring a new city. They know the shortcuts, the must-see spots, and most importantly, the areas to avoid. A good financial advisor can do that for you in the financial world. So it's not always as straightforward as, do I gift the house or not? What are some of the alternative routes a financial advisor might suggest when you're in this situation?
Well, for starters, instead of just gifting the property outright, they might suggest a partial sale. So you could sell a portion of the house to your child and then gift the remaining portion. That way you, the original owner, can tap into some of that capital gains exclusion yourself while still providing, a significant financial leg up to your child.
Right. It's all about finding that balance. Are there any other tools in the financial advisor's toolbox that they might pull out in a situation like this?
Trusts. Trusts are a really powerful tool when it comes to these sorts of things. Setting up a trust can give you a lot of flexibility and control over how and when those assets are distributed, and that can be a really effective way to potentially minimize those tax liabilities we've been talking about, both now and in the future.
This deep dive has been incredibly eye-opening. I think we all hear these things like, oh, we'll just gift them the house. But it's clearly not always as simple as it sounds on the surface.
You're absolutely right, and I think the biggest takeaway here is that every family situation is going to be unique. There's no one-size-fits-all solution when you're dealing with financial decisions like this.
It's like trying to fit those square blocks into the round hole, you know what I mean?
Right.
Sometimes you have to get a little creative and find the right approach for your specific puzzle.
I like that analogy. And oftentimes, the best approach is going to be a combination of strategies, something that's really tailored to your financial goals as a family and your overall family dynamics.
This has been an amazing look at just one small piece of the tax puzzle. And, it really makes you think, we've been focusing on gifting a house, but what about gifting other valuable assets? Things like stocks or even a family business. Makes you wonder about the tax implications of those scenarios.
You're spot on. The same principles we've been discussing, they really do apply across the board. So whether it's the family home, a stock portfolio that you've been building for years, or even, like you said, a family business, the key is to understand those tax consequences before you make a move.
So to our listeners out there, before you sign on that dotted line, especially when it comes to something as significant as gifting assets, do your research, talk to the experts, and always remember, what might seem like a very generous act today could turn into a financial headache down the road if you're not careful.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Being informed, really, it's the best gift you can give yourself and your loved ones.
And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into the complex world of gifting and taxes. We hope you learned a thing or two. As always, thank you for joining us, and we'll catch you next time for another deep dive. Until then, stay curious and keep those finances in check.